Hello, you're listening to Real Religion. This is Joseph Birch, and I'm here for the second interview with Charles Carlson, deacon in a Southern Baptist church. Charles, how are you doing today?
Doing well.
All right, thank you for your time.
I appreciate you asking me by.
All right, so I think what we were talking about last time, well, first of all, if anybody doesn't remember the episode that I put up last week or didn't happen to catch it, Charles, like I said, is a member of the Southern Baptist Church. He's currently active as a deacon. Am I correct?
That's correct.
And before that, he was in the United Methodist Church. And before that, he was raised in a missionary Baptist church. And he's been to a number of different types of Christian denominations, Protestant and some Catholic churches as well, although he was never officially a member. And has found its way into the Baptist church again, Southern Baptist this time. So, a few questions about that. I think the first one is going to be, how did you come to be a Southern Baptist?
I don't know that I selected it because it was called the Southern Baptist Church. It probably more so because it was a Baptist church.
Mm-hmm.
And as we spoke earlier, my early training as a child was in a missionary Baptist church. When I was 11 years old, we moved to upstate New York and actually became a member of a Baptist church there. Then times after that, we never left the Baptist church per se. It was more or less that there were other churches available in the area where I lived.
Other than Baptist?
Right. That's when I attended the Presbyterian church at times, and Methodist church.
Okay, so it was never
this church.
Right, it was never a decision to officially leave one church for another.
No.
It was just the churches that were available and suited to you. So did you officially become a member of the Methodist or the Presbyterian church?
No, just attended.
Okay.
And also during that time in New York, we had a Baptist minister who, in the summer months, he operated a small Baptist church, that very small. And then during winter months, we would convene, and it was like a house church. Maybe 20, 25 people would gather on the back porch and in adjoining rooms for church on Sunday.
All right. So my second question about you and your background and your current role in church, for those who might not be familiar, and I'm not sure I could give a satisfactory answer to this either. So for those of us who don't know, strictly speaking, what is the role of a deacon, and specifically in the Southern Baptist Church, or at least in the church that you're currently a part of?
My understanding of it is, contrary to the attitudes that I once held as a young person, that the deacons were part of the ruling class, if you will, where in reality, a deacon is a servant. That's the word that it comes from. And we are to serve the congregation, just like here in this church, among the deacon body, the families of the church will be apportioned out to a deacon. So you have a deacon family, and you should help them along, check in on them occasionally, if they have illness in the family, just you name it, if you can be of a help to them, an encouragement, then that's what we would do. And I look upon that as being the primary job of the deacon. Now, naturally, you have the board, you would have to convene on a regular basis, and uh, within that body, make decisions on, things that are to be done in the church.
Right.
But then, even after we make those decisions, that would be presented to the church body at a business meeting, and each member of the church has an opportunity to vote on that. So we try to discuss it, get it down to a point where we can present it for the approval or disapproval of the church and church body in general.
It's really a fairly democratic process.
Yes.
All right. And that's not, of course, that's not the case in every type of church.
Right.
Now, there are some denominations, I'm thinking specifically of the Catholic Church and others like it, where there are some permanent deacons, but for the most part, the role of deacon is sort of a preliminary to the priesthood.
Right.
Whereas for how does it work in your church? Is the deacon a permanent position? Is it an elected office? How does that?
The office of deacon in our church is one that you serve in for a period of 3 years. Then you go off the board and must be off the board at least a year before you're eligible to be reelected to the board. So we try to have an orderly turnover to provide for continuity and the team that's to carry on with the problem solving for the church.
Let me ask you a bit of an open-ended question here, and you could possibly take several different approaches to answering this. But in a Southern Baptist church, or specifically the one that you're in now, who has the primary authority to make decisions?
As I understand it, ultimately the decisions are made by the church body.
Okay.
We as deacons will discuss these matters and perhaps come up with recommendations that we present to the church body, but the actual decision on these matters, are voted on by each of the members that's in the church.
Okay. Two questions. Number one, well, maybe more than two. Number one, what kind of a role does the pastor of the church have in the decision-making processes?
I look upon the pastor as almost like the shepherd of this flock that we call Fairfax First Baptist.
All right.
He is present at our deacons meetings. He has, first of all, a training time to, add to the education of the deacons, maybe discipleship process and things like that. And he provides a lot of good input. And being at the church from day to day, he's probably got his hand on the pulse of things that are going on there day to day. So he has a great deal of input, valuable input. And, I have known of churches where it's almost like the relationship between the pastor and the board of deacons was almost adversarial. We presently are in a good place, I think. because our deacon board and our minister, we work together as we believe Christians should, and realizing that actually the work that we're about is God's work and not any of ours. We are just hopefully faithful servants in carrying out that job.
Okay. So now I do have two more questions about that topic, and then we can probably move on. When we talk about the process of decision making and the power of decision making for the churches, does that refer only to organizational decisions, or does that extend to doctrinal decision making? For instance, do the deacons, is it, I know one of the roles that the deacons serve in many churches is to make, or at least make suggestions about the financial decisions, the budgeting.
Correct.
Okay, so is it just that kind of thing, or do you also have to come up with solutions to any doctrinal disagreements or any theological problems in the church?
Well, I think in those cases, we would probably defer greatly to the leadership of the pastor, knowing, that he will base his decisions and be able to demonstrate from the scriptures why he holds a certain viewpoint. And I'm trying to recall a time of when we actually, I don't recall ever having to make a decision on what I would call doctrine.
Okay. So would it be fair to say that the pastor is, in a sense, the spiritual leader for a church, and maybe the deacons are the practical leadership?
I think that'd be a fair statement.
However, it seems that, like you said, the majority of the final decision making is given over to the congregation.
That's correct.
On all counts. So my other question is, how does that factor into being part of a larger organized body? Because the Southern Baptist Church it's a denomination, and so it has a sort of organizational centrality in that you all claim to be a part, all the Southern Baptist churches claim to be a part of the same group. How much independence does each church have, and what is the point of center for the Southern Baptists?
From what I have seen, the local church is absolutely autonomous from the Southern Baptist leadership. We do not get orders from higher headquarters or things like that.
So there's not a hierarchy to the Southern Baptist Church?
Not to my knowledge. I've never noticed it.
So is it just sort of, is it more like a voluntary association of churches? For example, a church will become a part of the Southern Baptist Convention if it is more or less in agreement with the other churches that are part of that?
That's my understanding of it. You have the Baptist Faith and Message, which lays out, what we believe on certain.
Right. But as I understand it, that's more of a descriptive document than it is a mandate.
Right. And what it is
because the Southern Baptist Church isn't confessional. It doesn't have a organized sort of body of belief. To my knowledge, it has a consensus of belief more so than a belief that's formally laid out and handed down through a hierarchy.
Oh, right.
Of course, either of us might be mistaken about anything we're saying.
Well, that's the thing that I would like to point out, that sometimes I feel a little, more than a little, awkward in acting or letting people think that I'm speaking for the Southern Baptist Convention or anything like that. I'm just a simple person who has been elected to fulfill a job within the church, deacon. The congregation saw fit to place faith in me to carry out their will and wishes. And when all is said and done, I like to try and just stick with what I understand that God would have me to do from the Bible, and
Right. Okay.
because I could not tell you all of what the official Southern Baptist faith and message says
Right.
in detail.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. There is a general disclaimer that I've mentioned a couple of times about this podcast that people are here to speak about their personal beliefs. And so when I ask a question about your denomination or about a whole religion, I'm not necessarily asking, I'm not asking for an expert testimony. How knowledgeable you might be about certain organizations, and you might be very knowledgeable in some
Well,
cases. But
thank you that you're not expecting me to be an expert.
right, well, yeah. So obviously, for those listening, and I try to say this about everyone, when my guest, any of my guests speak about their beliefs, they're speaking for themselves personally. So you're not here claiming to speak for all Southern Baptists or all
No,
Baptists or all Christians or all monotheistic.
not at
No.
all.
So, but with that in mind, you have as much right as anybody, in my view, to talk about the organization and the beliefs of the world. Even though nobody's going to get everything right, there are plenty of people who've studied religions for a very long time and they don't know everything. So anyway, I think we've covered the disclaimer, but
Okay.
thank you for bringing that up because I try to mention that in every episode and sometimes I fail to do so. But I think yeah. So we've covered your background again. We've covered your current activities in the church to some extent. I think we can press on with the interview. If you remember, last time we talked, we ended by with a discussion of the idea of salvation and the afterlife, and we were talking about what heaven is like and who can go to heaven and things like that. And I think we touched on the idea of hell and what it's like and who goes there in your personal view. So I think with that being said, we can move on from there and talk a little bit more about the spiritual, more about the otherworldly and the supernatural. This is the section of interviews that touches the most on topics that have been sensationalized and heavily featured in the media, and film and things like that. And so it's interesting to go back and get a religious perspective on what we can sometimes forget seem to be very inherently spiritualistic things. Um, so since last time we were talking about the afterlife, I'm going to pick it up right there.
Okay.
You said that basically there are two places for souls to take up an eternal residence after physical death, right?
That's my understanding.
There's essentially you either are a Christian and go to heaven, or you're not and you don't, and if you don't, then you are in hell.
Correct.
Okay. Now, that being said, is there a possibility for ghosts to exist? And when I mean ghosts, I want to clarify. Ghost, well, maybe I won't clarify. I'll leave it open ended for you to define, unless you'd like me to be more specific.
If there are ghosts, I've never seen one. I've never talked to one.
Right.
And there are more things in this world than we understand. So I don't know that I could be much help on the ghost subject.
All right. So, am I to understand you're saying it's possible?
Until otherwise proven. Now, if here I'll go back into scriptural events. So, like when the witch of Endor called up, what was it, Samuel,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know that that was actually Samuel. I wonder, because I think when we start dabbling in some of these things, like back in the earlier days of my life, I was caught up in the occult.
Would this be that period that you spoke of
Yeah, my
before?
prodigal period, and participated in seances and all that type of thing. Was really interested in it. Ouija boards, and a lot of the other things that go along with that. But again, even though we had been in some very spooky locations, never saw any ghosts, never heard any ghosts, but along the lines, the more I read the Bible, I'm thinking, sometimes when you dabble in things like that, you don't know what a dangerous ground you're treading on.
Okay. Now, I wanna explore that statement because I've heard a lot of people say that from various backgrounds, various worldviews, various reasons for making that kind of a statement. So I want to ask you, what are the dangers in becoming involved in occult practices or anything of that nature that maybe we don't fully understand?
Here again, these are, my personal
Right.
thoughts on it. And I think when we become involved in things like the occult, that we're opening ourselves up. And I do believe that a person can be possessed. And I don't think, or I don't believe that a Christian can be possessed.
Okay. Could we pause there? And I
Sure.
want to explore this topic because that was what I was kind of suspecting that we'd get to when you mentioned danger. Um, and obviously, this is the kind of subject that it's very, uh, I don't know, very sensationalized, very contentious. Uh, when you say possessed, you're referring to demonic activity.
Exactly.
So it's possible for a demon to, an evil spirit to enter and take control of the body of a human.
I believe that.
Okay. But you said not a Christian.
Right.
So here's the question. What if that Christian has some sort of lapse of faith or lapse of morality? Are they then in danger? For example, you were already a baptized, believing Christian during your period of involvement with the occult, but you said last time you weren't particularly concerned with Christianity and you were dabbling in the occult and you believe that that was a dangerous thing to do. Was it dangerous for you? Were you opening yourself to possession or were you protected because of your Christianity?
I didn't realize it at the time, but since that time in reading, I've come to be convinced that even though I was in I guess you want to use the term backslidden situation, a prodigal situation, that God had not let me go. He had not given me up. And I think once a person becomes a believer, and they may not have a perfect knowledge of Jesus Christ, but if they are believing, like it says, you believe in your heart and you confess with your mouth that he is who he says he is, and the one who sent him, the Father, nothing can take you out of his hand. And I believe I was protected in that regard. Now, I do believe, however, that while not being able to be possessed, that you can be oppressed.
Okay. Now, this is something that I've read about. This is something that I've heard other people speak about. I'm gonna ask you to define that. What do you mean by oppressed as opposed to possessed?
It's hard for me to do it. It's like maybe almost like a dark, not physically a dark cloud, but psychologically a cloud hanging over you where you are, how can I put it? Well, I won't say tormented, but it's just hard to put into words, really.
Well, but in other words, if you can't be possessed by a demon, then a demon could still influence your senses and your perception, maybe your emotions from the outside.
Well,
or manipulate you in some way, or manipulate events around you.
At least in this regard, if I am in accord with what God would be having me to be and to do, I have that sense of joy.
Okay.
Now, in a situation where I have wandered away from God, gotten involved in things that I ought not be involved with, as I said before, God has not let me go. But that separation from him takes with it that sense of joy. And that sense of joy with the oppression, from the occult side of it, gives you the opposite results of joy. You are depressed, and
Okay.
And I think the turning point for me was seeing the movie The Exorcist. And a lot of people, just the movie, the special effects and all, that's what affected them.
Right.
That fear. But what affected me was the fact that this is a movie, but this can and does happen. And the force that we are dealing here with, people play lightly with it,
Right.
but it is a force of evil.
I think that The Exorcist, well, it was a sort of a pioneering film, but it and other movies like it have had a tremendous impact on individuals and on our culture, because they portray a very specific form of what they identify as pure evil. And when a book or a movie about demons or diabolical possession comes out, especially in that time when it wasn't common knowledge. I mean, now demonic possession is a household word. You might hear it at any given dinner table, but when it comes out and people are looking for, maybe it has based on a true story before it, and people are looking for, is this legitimate? And you have an established authority figure like a church saying, yes, it is, this kind of thing can and does happen. You just said you believe that it can and does occur. I've heard Catholic priests say that The Exorcist was an exaggeration in that it's unheard of for everything that happened in that movie to happen to one person. But, and I've heard multiple priests and multiple people of other Christian traditions say this, any of those things can happen, just not all to the same person. Would you concur with that there's nothing completely...
Well, like in the particular, when we saw the movie, the various events that happened to that individual, they'll gross you out.
Right.
But the ultimate thing that troubled me was not the individual events, but the power behind that evil. And that's what troubled me.
The idea of the possible presence of the ultimate evil in a real person's life. Right. Did you go to see The Exorcist expecting entertainment or adrenaline rush, or was it?
I and two other Navy buddies, we went. For what reason, I don't know.
Just to go?
But when we came away from that, I think it shook all of us. And we talked about it, about the effect that it had. It says, this is not make-believe. It affected us to the point that the next day was Sunday. And we were all three in church.
And this was during the period where you weren't going to church.
Right.
And these gentlemen who were with you, were they churchgoers?
About like me.
Okay.
But
so it was an anomaly at that point for any of you to go.
Right.
All right.
And then at home, I had a copy of the book, The Exorcist, laying on my nightstand. I hadn't started to read it. I'd actually gone to see the movie first.
Okay.
But the very presence of that book, I could not sleep comfortably having that book there. I had a bookshelf, I don't know, I had been collecting occult books, black magic, and all that stuff.
Okay.
Well, I picked that up, I guess, really when I was in Vietnam, started reading. Well, as a result of my exorcist experience, the book The Exorcist and all of my occult books left my bookshelf, and they went a little creek up the road here. I took them all there, and I said, not only am I not going to read them, no one is going to read them.
Wow. Okay.
And I said, I cleaned that out. I said, I don't want anything else to do with Ouija boards. I don't read horoscopes and things like that.
Okay.
I just, it may sound like I went overboard, but I felt much better.
All right. I have quite a few questions.
Okay.
I have quite a few. First of all, what prompted you to start exploring the occult?
Well, in Vietnam, it could either be very exciting or very boring. For the most part, most of the time, it was very boring. And it was a subject, I think I'd picked up a book on Edgar Cayce, The Sleeping Prophet, and that led one thing to another.
Okay.
And it just went from there. I just found it sort of fascinating.
Did you believe in it?
I don't think I really did.
So when you were present, you said you were present at seances?
Right.
When you were present at seances, were you ever really expecting to hear from the other side?
Um, I don't know if I was or not.
Okay.
We were young
Right.
and, uh, you know, still
So,
had a lot
not
to
sure.
learn.
It was just something you were exploring. And
Right.
then you saw The Exorcist and you decided to stop exploring. Okay. So, since we're talking about demons, what is a demon?
I think it is one of the hosts of heaven that when Satan was cast down, that he carried with him.
Okay.
Some, as we read, are bound for the time being, and at some future point will be released. And that fallen angels, I guess, would be the
Okay.
same thing.
So, fairly, pretty much the traditional, prevalent Christian
Right.
definition. And they're angels led in rebellion against God by what, an archangel or another angel.
Well, Satan, he was the most beautiful,
Okay.
and
And he's the leader of all
right.
these. Okay. So if a person falls under the influence of one of these fallen angels, these demons, what is the solution to that? Is there a solution to that?
Well, to me, I've had no personal experience with that, but just in my way of thinking that it would be just as in times past when, Jesus would cast out demons, and whether or not individuals have that power now or authority, I, I don't know.
Okay. So if possession happens today, I mean, let me try a hypothetical. If someone comes to you and says, "I'm possessed by a demon," how do you respond?
I think my, not long ago, I thought, man, I don't know what I would do. But now, I think my first response would be, would you consider participating in biblical counseling? And
Okay.
then I would direct him to our pastor and say, here you go. Can you help him?
All right.
And I believe he probably could.
Okay. So thank you. And even if the possession is genuine, there's really a demon possessing a person or trying to possess a person. A full-on ritualistic exorcism might not be the only solution, or am I misreading you there?
Um, I just can't say that I have a lot of confidence. And of course, my only experience has been, the sensationalized picturing of it. And
Right. The only uh, I'm assuming the knowledge that you have is based on um, films like The Exorcist and biblical accounts
right.
of demons. Um,
And
so,
I basically, say like as far as Baptists, I've never heard of Baptists casting out demons. But that doesn't mean maybe it hadn't happened. But
I have heard some who claim to profess to have done that through different methods
right.
than a Catholic church, the Catholic Church, or the Eastern Orthodox Church might use,
Right.
because I don't know how knowledgeable you are on the subject, but the Catholic Church, and the Eastern Orthodox Church, and the Church of England all have fairly specific procedure, fairly specific ritual, fairly specific requirements. As far as I know, other churches, Protestant churches, are a bit less clear on the matter. I have heard many Protestants talk about the devil, about demons, about possession, and even about exorcism, but it seems to me that in my very limited knowledge of the subject, the Protestant approach tends to be more prayer focused.
That would be what I would be comfortable with.
Okay.
I look at it and I would approach it from, if a person is possessed,
Mhm.
I know I don't have the power to do anything, with that person. So God is, in my opinion, the one who must do it.
Okay.
But like I'd mentioned, the biblical counseling,
Right.
some people, they may feel that they're possessed, and maybe it's a mental illness.
Right.
I, I don't believe in demons to the extent that I don't believe in mental illness that can
Okay.
be helped through
So
counseling and
demons.
sometimes medication.
Okay. So demons are not the answer to all of our
Right.
questions.
Right.
They're not the cause of every ailment. Okay. So, so many places we can go with this. In case anyone listening hasn't connected the dots, and I'm not expecting you to have done this, but you could have connected the dots. The pastor that he's mentioned is David Gennaro, who was our first guest on the podcast. It's the same church.
Correct.
And so it'll be interesting to see if you two disagree on anything or agree on anything. In some circles, I'm not going to comment on this one way or another, but in some circles, the Baptists have a reputation for not agreeing amongst themselves as much as certain other groups.
Well, I guess, if we could disagree without being disagreeable, or because we disagree doesn't mean we hate one another.
Right.
If we could realize that, you don't have to believe like I believe for me to like you.
Right. And you also seem very, very strongly in agreement with the idea that getting everything right in terms of your beliefs is not the key to salvation or the purpose of life. Is that correct?
Well, probably at the end of life, there are going to be many, many, many things that you don't know about your faith. But to me, the essentials are, God, Jesus Christ, our Savior, who willingly died for me. And what even makes it greater in my mind is, I could say, yeah, I'm egocentric. He died for me. Yes, he did die for me, but what makes me love him more is that he died for everyone, regardless what the color of their skin, where they're from. And that makes him very special. So believing that and trusting that I have no way on earth of being acceptable to God. None. No hope whatsoever, aside from trusting in what Jesus Christ has done for me. And that's where to me, that sums it up. If you're good with that, you may not know anything about the Protestant Reformation or, how many popes we got or had. You know Jesus Christ personally.
Okay. So, moving back and moving on a little bit at the same time, we define demons and the devil and fallen angels. But we haven't defined angels yet.
Okay.
So I think most people have an idea of what the concept of an angel is, in most beliefs that would use the word. But go ahead and give us your personal take on it, if you would.
Here again, like so many of the subjects, it's very superficial. But I see angels as being created beings of God. Um, and as we're told over and over, uh, the very word for that is a messenger, and they do
Right.
serve throughout Scripture as messengers, bringing to Mary and other people that we know. Um, and what they do beyond that, you know, uh, I don't know that we will know this side of heaven just what they have done. I've heard people talk about, a protecting believers and things of that nature, and it's it's a subject that could, really be pursued and probably very profitably. Um,
Is that first of all, you said angels are created beings, spirits of a kind, maybe.
right.
So people don't become angels when they die,
No,
and people can't become demons either.
no.
Okay. Um, so is it possible for people to communicate with angels, or would that just be a dangerous endeavor?
Well, if we, look at a number of the accounts in the Bible that humans, Jacob and others, talk with the angel of the Lord, and actually, I think usually that's interpreted as being Jesus Christ himself before his incarnation, which, that would say, yes, you could talk with him. Um, but I guess you would need to be very careful
About
to assure who you are talking with. That's like uh, things that I have trouble with now. It's like people uh, recommend meditation. Said, it brings such inner peace and all that.
mhm.
And as I understand it, the primary step is to empty your mind.
Well, it
And
depends.
I have this thing about me. I says, uh, seems like I heard something back in my high school science that nature abhors a vacuum. If I empty my mind, something's going to come into it, and it might not be what I want.
Hmm.
Therefore, I would be, I think, better advised to fill my mind with wholesome things.
Okay. Now, so you would not be one to practice meditation of any kind,
Um,
at least
well,
not in the popular.
not in the yoga sense of
Okay.
meditation.
All right. So you don't do yoga.
Well, I probably should.
All right. Now, uh, there are plenty of people who do meditate who seem to be quite well
Right.
and not under any sinister influence. Now, does that say that maybe meditation isn't too dangerous, or does that just say that not every dangerous thing is inevitably harmful?
It
So,
would.
for instance, people say, and you've said, okay, the occult is dangerous.
Mhm.
Seances are dangerous. Talking to things that aren't there and aren't God is dangerous. Emptying your mind is dangerous. Does dangerous mean wrong, or does it just mean risky?
Uh, Probably risky, at least. and dangerous at the worst.
Okay.
Um, and it's like people who choose to do that. That's the whole thing about it. We're free to do that.
Mm.
But then when we make these decisions, choices, that will lead to recourse. We're going to have results that we might not like.
All right.
And I just choose personally uh, to handle it that way. I would probably meditation, say in the biblical sense, I believe I would be well advised to do that. And simple things rather than emptying my mind, I think a very profitable thing would be for me to think on God.
Right.
What is he like? And try to really follow out just what he is like and how, we underestimate him. And you start thinking about holiness and, omniscience and omnipotence and all those other things and what all of those lead to, and it's enough to fill your mind.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about morality, because there are various moral things that you've mentioned already about things that you should and should not do, ways that you should and should not act or think. First of all, and I think most people will be able to predict your answer to this question, but I don't want that to influence you. I want you to just answer it. Is there an absolute morality?
I'm not sure I thoroughly understand the term other than I try to put it in a biblical context, and I would imagine it to be all that God requires.
Okay.
Staying within that would be to me the perfect morality. Would be to meet all of the requirements that God has set for us. And if anybody's not aware of it, we can't do it.
Right. Okay, so there's also then, I'm assuming, in your view, an objective morality. In other words, if something is immoral, it is immoral. It's wrong. You shouldn't do it. If something is good and it's beneficial, or it's in your way of phrasing, it's what God would ask of you, it's good and you should do it. Period. Is that fair? Or I understand probably you're going to say there's some nuance to that.
Example of one of those maybe.
Well, I'm just saying, and I can give an example. I just mean that moral subjectivity as opposed to moral objectivity, like the idea that nothing is inherently right or wrong. It's not something you ascribe to.
I wouldn't buy that.
Okay. Now, as for, and I want to talk then because you asked for an example. That's interesting. Some people believe that there are many acts out there that are only right or wrong depending on the context and the intent, and or that certain acts are always wrong depending on not depending on context or intent. So, and that's basically the main, I perceive, the main basis behind moral debate. How much does it depend on context and intent? So, for example, let's take stealing. I'm assuming you're a Christian, you believe that it is immoral to take someone else's possession that they've have a right to.
That's correct.
Okay. What if you're taking it for the preservation of your own life?
It's still stealing.
Okay. What if you're taking it for the preservation of someone else's life?
We know what will happen. You know, we will begin to rationalize in our human way that, you know, I can save this person's life by stealing this. But do we ever, how far do we go in concern? Okay. Is there any other way to save that person's life without stealing?
Okay. So when people present to you that kind of dilemma, you say, find any other answer.
Well, I've never in 68 years experienced anything in life like that. And probably a lot of people may find that to be the case. And when we're confronted by hypotheticals, it can become very difficult, especially when, you know, it's something like you say, okay, you steal this little item here, you save this person's life, you know. But hypothetically, no.
Okay. All right. Now, what about, now this is a little more complicated, some people would say. It's morally wrong. Most people would, well, nearly all people who believe in morality would say it is immoral to murder a person. But most people don't think it's always immoral to kill a person. So, and I've asked people about this before. What's the difference between killing and murdering? So, for example, it's wrong to take somebody's life. But is it wrong to take somebody's life in self-defense?
I don't think so. You know, my understanding is, and why I never found any difficulty with military service or police service, which poses the possibility that you may have to take the life of another, is that, you know, as I recall, you know, the commandments, thou shalt not kill, and checking that closer at more, thou shalt not murder, you know, or say like capital punishment wouldn't be murder. Things like that, sadly, in a fallen world, things like that, we wish it were otherwise, but it does happen.
Okay. So ideally then it would not happen.
Right.
But there are situations in which that's your only reasonable choice and you're not doing anything immoral by making that choice.
Right. I believe there are many believers who have lived and served in military forces and maybe
Sure.
police forces that have had to kill, not out of choice,
Right.
but and they do not escape. What I want to say is they carry with them, even though it may be morally correct to take that life, that still doesn't carry in that memory of killing another person.
The compassionate person is still troubled by
right,
that.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
You put it much better.
No, there are a lot of other questions that we could get into in hypotheticals. And since I haven't gone into morality in depth with people in these yet, I want to, well, maybe the James Johnson ones had some morality in them, but that was not of the same type, not the same viewpoint. So I will explore this a little more if you'll permit me.
Okay.
Now, there are some people who have a concept of reduced culpability of a person based on their intent or their ability to not to abstain from doing something. For example, addiction. We've discovered now that some people seem predisposed to addiction to substances and possibly to actions. Addiction take the form of strong psychological compulsions and in some cases strong physical reactions, even to the point of withdrawal. For example, I'm going to ask, since not everyone agrees, some Christians would say that you shouldn't drink alcohol. Many Christians would say that you can drink alcohol, but only in moderation. You should not become drunk. What would you say about the general rule, without going into what I said about addiction? What's the general rule about alcohol from your moral viewpoint?
I have had alcohol beverage.
Okay.
I have been drunk
Okay.
in prodigal days. And here, I think I've heard a lot of people say, well, you can be a Christian and have a drink occasionally,
Right.
but you can't be a Baptist. And, they point out that you do not use alcohol as a beverage. So, and especially as a deacon, you would think, hey, you've got to be on setting an example
Okay.
for people. And I've always, even back in the day, was not convicted of that as it was going to send me to hell if I was drinking a beer or something like that.
Right.
And right now I don't get into a big thing about that for the reason that, whether, regardless what a person may think on it, if I'm adhering to this Baptist faith and message, then my thing should be, especially as a deacon, to set the example for
Okay.
others by doing what's right. And Baptists catch the devil for holding that, because there seems to be saying one thing and doing another.
Okay. Right.
So I can't defend a person saying, I'm a Baptist, but I'm a drinker.
Okay.
Or, because I don't know, it's
one of those things that it might not be objectively evil, but it's not necessarily a good idea.
I would say if a person can go through life and never drink, you will not lose one thing.
All right.
But many, many lives and families have been ruined by drinking.
Okay. And that's true. But what I want to ask is how much moral guilt is on people who have encountered that problem themselves, have developed alcoholism, and it's led to negative consequences for themselves and people around them. Because some people would say it's an addiction. They can't without help, and sometimes even with help, there's a medical problem that has to be overcome. And so they're not to be held complete. Other people would say, well, it was their choice to start in the first place.
I look at it as being similar to sin in general.
All right.
Uh, we're predisposed to sin. There are some who probably even say, I can't help myself. I have to sin. Well, if I can't help myself, I'm sort of addicted to it. You hear all sorts of, I'm a sex addict, I'm a this addict or a that addict.
Right.
And you say, so where do we go from there? And I think just as with the sin or any of these other things, the point to heading to a solution is to admit that you have a problem.
All right.
It's not just something that you write off, well, I can't help it. You say, I've got a problem. And until the person admits that it is a problem, I don't believe there can be any help.
Right.
And it's just like me, a sinner. That's one of the key steps. Repentance, admission that I am a sinner. I am a drunk. I am a this or a that. And once you get that firmly in mind and then, okay, now I've got this problem. What do I do? What do I do with it?
It does seem that the Christian moral philosophy almost does view sins and immoral acts as addictions, that there is something about them that makes people want that which, in your view, is harmful to them, and that the only thing it does is make you want more of that thing that, it's harmful. As you even referenced last time, a passage, and I think it was one of the letters of Paul in the New Testament, where he said that could almost was at a loss as to explain why the things that he wanted to do and the things that he found himself doing weren't always the same. So I think that somewhat answers the addiction question. It's a complicated question. I don't think you and I are going to answer every question. No. If it hasn't been settled yet, I don't think it's going to be settled on my podcast.
But it's a start.
One final question, because it's come up in discussions that I've heard and that I've partaken in about different denominations and different religions. It comes as interesting to some people, the different positions that different churches and different religions take on issues. Now, divorce is one that's come up in some conversations that I've had recently. For what reason, I know not, but it's come up. And in the Catholic Church, there is no divorce. If a problem can be found with a marriage that it's not valid from the Catholic point of view, then it can be annulled, in which case they can say it never happened because it wasn't a real marriage.
Right.
In the Eastern Orthodox Church, you can only get a divorce if one of the spouses has an affair. The Anglican Episcopal churches have strongly softened their point of view on divorce, and some decades ago, they originally took a much more absolute, more Catholic stand on it. If comparable, to the Catholics. I'm not calling them Catholic or not Catholic. That's not for me to say right here, right now. What I'm getting at is, for all the moral consensus that there is about some things among Christians, there are some things that they cannot agree on at all. And a lot of it comes down to the definition of marriage and marital, morality and that kind of thing. More so, I think, than almost any other moral question. So, and I don't have an agenda here in saying this. When the Baptists and the Christians of all kinds, well, not of all kinds. There are there are many Christians who are democratic and liberal, but when especially the Baptist churches have had developed a reputation, at least, of coming down strongly on a conservative, absolute right and wrong side of things, and have at least developed the reputation in the public eye of taking these strong stances on issues like that, and strong support of what's called the sanctity of marriage by a lot of people. And yet, there's not a clear stance among a lot of Christians about divorce. What I want to know is, number one, why is that? And number two, where do you come in?
Sometimes I wonder if many of our people who are ambivalent about it, like say in the church, we probably have a wide range of views on it.
Mm-hmm.
If they're familiar, well, what exactly did Jesus teach about it? What can the Bible tell us about this? And that to me is sort of our message from God. This is what I'm like. This is what I want. So if we want to please Him, as we should, that's where that should be the source of our decision making. Then again, there too, they may be ambivalent because so many people fall into that. They are divorced, perhaps multiple times, which is possible to give you a different viewpoint.
And it's very common.
Right.
Yeah, very common.
And now I know my parents were divorced. And in that same little church I was raised up, Missionary Baptist, when she remarried, which, even remarriage of a divorced person, is sort of iffy. Well, they accepted them into church, but the husband could hold no offices, or, you were there, but.
Okay.
And, that's the way they operate on it. I personally, regardless of what the Baptist church or anybody else thinks, yes, from my reading of the Bible, to me, marriage is one man, a woman, forever. That's the way it was intended to be, and the divorce thing came along later. I don't think because it was God's intent, but then it was for marital infidelity, and pretty well that's where I stand on it. If I would like to see people, if they're in a struggling marriage, this is where this biblical counseling, I think that could be a great help. It might not be a 100% solution, but it'd help people to get an idea of what God's views are on it. And, at least make an effort, a good faith effort, because in my thinking, no one goes unharmed by a divorce. It's the husband, the wife, the children all get hurt. Just speaking from firsthand. But there are instances, and that's not all that long ago, talking to a lady who had been in a marriage, an unfaithful husband, an abusive husband. Now, I wouldn't be able to tell her, oh, yes, you should stay there for the sake of the children. I think, first of all, when he became unfaithful, he cut those ties. But sort of in touching on this wide range of understandings of it, this lady had attended was in a church. I think it might have been a Bible study. And the people they were discussing divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And she and I think some of her friends who had also experienced divorce suddenly began to feel they're talking about us, you know, and it made them feel very uncomfortable, to say the least. And, I think the people mean well, but sometimes they don't understand just what these people are dealing with.
Right. So, would you say that
In a case like that, I would say, I don't think God would hold them to maintaining a marriage where the partner is unfaithful and physically abusive and things like
yeah, without commenting personally on divorce or remarriage or marriage or anything, I want to say that I don't think I don't find it beneficial to anyone involved for a person to remain in an abusive situation. Without touching on divorce, I think one way or another, finding your way out of that situation is something that is possible and is advisable. That's just to the listener, that take that for what you will. But talking about these situations where people are in a religious atmosphere and there's a moral discussion and they feel singled out, they feel offended, they feel uncomfortable. Do you think that churches, religious people, should be more careful and more sensitive when they talk about moral issues?
I think it would be good to be thoughtful in word choices and especially things like that when we know that a good many of our people who we love dearly have experienced that, and we don't want to bring them any more hurt. And at the same time, if there was a way, and that might be, small groups, I think, are good for this. So, like in the case of ladies, a small group, they could discuss something like that, to where these over here who had not experienced would at least have an improved understanding of where these people have been, and probably in a wide range of things. I think that type of, being able to discuss more than in just general details and having the confidence, this is our small group. This is not going beyond our small group. We're growing to trust each other, and it's just, it's healthy.
All right. All right, so thank you for all your answers. I do generally conclude with just asking people about how their faith has affected their life. And you've said a lot about that already, and I thank you for that. Do you have anything to add to that or to any other subject that we've mentioned?
Actually, I thank you for the opportunity. For those who may listen to this, I sincerely hope that I have not caused any misunderstanding for anyone, or hopefully they don't think that I'm some kind of nut job. But I'm thankful for the opportunity to be a witness, like initially I said, to be able to tell others, how my life has changed from what it was before I knew God. And this is the type of thing that we should do daily with people that we meet. Maybe not in such detail, but I thank you.
All right. Well, thank you again very much for your time. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening to Real Religion. And please come back next week for another episode.